Welcome back to our next lesson. So let's say that you have the opportunity to not only assemble a team, but to do a new hire. So now we're actually going to be hiring someone into the organization, and we want to make sure that they're a high performer. Interesting thing is it's really expensive to hire and train people. And wouldn't it be nice if you could actually predict their performance? Well, with data from science, you actually can do that. So today's lesson is about how to predict and hire high performers during the interview process. So let's move to the PowerPoint slides and see how we actually hire and predict performance. So how are we going to identify which applicants are going to keep going in the face of constant rejection and failure? That's the test. We want to make sure that not only are people going to perform well, but that they're going to be able to bounce back from any form of rejection. And so what we're going to be doing is actually looking at one of the most difficult jobs in the world and trying to predict high performers during the interview. That's the study that we're going to be looking at today. And you can apply this information to hiring team members for your team. So again, we're referring back to work done at the University of Pennsylvania in the Master of Applied Positive Psychology program. I actually am a student for the Master of Applied Positive Psychology program at the University of Pennsylvania. So these are studies that I've actually learned, and Marty Seligman, the father of positive psychology, is one of my professors. So this is why I'm referencing this data. And it may be new to you. However, it's actually new in the United States. This area of positive psychology is only about 20 years old. It's pretty new. Well, what they found at the University of Pennsylvania is, again, optimists are more successful than pessimists. And you'll notice some of these slides you'll remember from the last lesson. The reason I'm repeating a few of them is that they're so important, I don't want you to forget. So having the review that optimists are more successful than pessimists, even if the pessimist is smarter, doesn't matter. Optimism trumps pessimism. And here is a case study that was done. It was a very difficult case study. They actually wanted to look for one of the hardest things in the world, and that is being a salesperson. So selling is one of the most difficult jobs in the world because of the rejection. And a really hard thing to sell is life insurance. A lot of people don't want life insurance because they don't want to think about dying. They don't think they're going to die, and they don't want to deal with it or spend money on it. It's not a popular product. It's not like buying a new car and you get to have fun with the car. So this was a large insurance company in the United States called MetLife. It's over 100 years old. It was one of the largest insurance companies in the world. And here's the situation. 60,000 people apply to become a life insurance agent at MetLife every year. But only 8.3% are hired, only 5,000. Now, that's a pretty rigorous number. They toss out a lot of people. So you would think that 8%, these 5,000 out of 60,000 would be amazing. When they are, half of them, the other half quit in a year. 80% quit at the end of year 4. Now, here's where the money comes in. It costs $30,000 to train one agent. So when you look at half the agents quitting in year 1, that's 2,500 times 30,000 US dollars. It costs MetLife $75 million in hiring costs when these people leave. So what MetLife did is they actually hired University of Pennsylvania to figure this out. Could you save us $75 million a year? Answer is yes. Here's how they did it. First, they started to look at why do people quit? And people quit for pretty much the same reason. So even if you're not looking at salespeople, take a look at this relationship. So every day, someone is hearing no several times in a row. They're getting rejected. Their boss says they're not doing a good job. Their coworkers aren't saying nice things to them. That keeps happening over and over again. Eventually, they feel discouraged. Most people would. But then each subsequent no is going to be more and more painful. It has more of a sting. The first one wasn't so bad. The 50th really hurts. So it requires more effort to keep going. In this example, for the next sales call in a team, to make another idea, make another suggestion. Let's say people say your ideas are awful. The last 10 were awful. Be quiet. well, you don't want to come up and say the 11th idea, which could be amazing, because you heard so many no's. So that's where the discouraging part comes in. Well, then comes procrastination. And this is where you stop making the sales calls. Maybe you stop going to team meetings. Maybe you stop contributing to team meetings with your ideas because you don't want to get another no. So your production drops. Your manager, of course, will tell you about this. Hey, you're not doing as well. You don't come to meetings. When you do come to meetings, you don't say anything. You're not really being productive. You're not selling anything. Well, once you hear that, then you start thinking about quitting. And of course, another challenge is going to inevitably come in your job. You can't overcome it and you quit. So this is the cycle of how people quit. And this goes in sales as well as outside of sales. Now, a way around this one is the attributional style questionnaire, or the ASQ. And what it's looking for, it's measuring the range of people's pessimism to optimism. And it can actually measure deep pessimism all the way up to what we call irrepressible optimism, which is almost crazy optimism. It's like it's too optimistic, it's almost unrealistic. And basically what they found is that the more optimism you have gives you more persistence, and then you become immune to helplessness, which means you're willing to try again and again and again and again in the face of no, 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 no. And this is what we want. We want people to be just as creative, just as engaged, just as motivated if they've had a series of losses. Well, here's the explanatory style that we're looking for. When we hear no to ourselves, optimists say different things to themselves than a pessimist. An optimist, if they were told no when trying to sell some life insurance, they would say the sales prospect was too busy, they already have insurance, but 80% of people are uninsured, I called at the wrong time, it was during supper, or they don't even analyze the no. They just pick up the phone and go to the next call. So that's what optimists do. Pessimists, they take it really hard. When they get that one rejection from that one person, they say, I'm no good. My entire body's no good. No one, not just this person, but everyone in the world, no one wants to buy insurance from me, and I can't even get to first base. I can't even start. So notice what people say to themselves. It's called their explanatory style, which is a fancy way of saying, what do you say inside your head to explain what happened? So the ASQ, the Attributional Style Questionnaire, gives you 12 hypothetical scenarios. 6 of them are good, where, for example, you suddenly become rich and they ask you to explain, how did you get rich? 6 of them are bad situations. Let's say you had a bad date. They ask you to explain why you had the bad date. And then you just have to rate the cause. And then they start to do a score. So the Attributional Style Questionnaire is actually looking at 3 areas. One is personalization, the other is permanence, and then pervasiveness. And again, this is a review from our last session. So personalization is looking for internal causes and external causes. So for example, let's say you had a bad date. The optimist would say, I didn't like them. I wouldn't even think about whether they liked me. I didn't care. I didn't like them. A pessimist would say, I'm unlovable. An optimist could also not take responsibility for the date and blame someone else, blame the waiter or waitress that they had made an evening bad. Or the pessimist could blame the dating app. The online dating doesn't like me. What if you didn't get the job? An optimist would say, well, I didn't like the job either. It wasn't a fit. So notice how there's confidence there. The pessimist says, I wasn't good enough. Again, my entire being wasn't good enough. I wasn't good enough for that job. I'm not good enough for anything. The optimist also would say, I'm always going to be a great employee for the right job. Just need the right job. That's all I need. A pessimist would say, I'll never get a job. So notice what people say to themselves and what they also say to you. And you'll also be able to start to pick out in your daily life, which of your friends are optimists and pessimists. I'd encourage you to have more optimists in your life than pessimists. Next one is, let's say you did a poor job sailing a boat. An optimist would come up with a specific reason just to that day, just that day's sail. The wind was too much and it was choppy, that was it. A pessimist would say, I'm just a bad sailor. They wouldn't blame it on the weather. An optimist would say, I can do well if the conditions are right with sailing, but a pessimist would say I'm bad at everything. So notice how an optimist is really specific about their failures, but a pessimist, they apply it to other areas of their lives. So what they did is that they gave the ASQ test to agents. They hired 200 agents. They hired, and first what they did is they hired them the old-fashioned way that MetLife was doing it. And they then gave them the optimism test after they were hired. So they were not hired for optimism or pessimism. They were hired based on MetLife's old method. And then they said, okay, let's find 100 optimists and 100 pessimists. They found them. And what they found is that they looked at the optimists, they split them in half, top 50% optimists versus bottom 50. The top 50% optimists sold 37% more insurance in years 1 and 2. So now we have data that they actually perform better. But what if we went for like the super optimists, the top 10%? The top 10% sold 88% more in years 1 or 2. So it's not just being optimistic. The more optimism, the more success. So be mindful of that when you're hiring people for a team. You want the most optimistic people, not just a little bit of optimism. So here was the MetLife career profile hiring method. What they were basically doing, which is pretty standard. What they do is they do empirical data where they want to interview you on your actual experience. Have you sold life insurance before? But then they have a theory portion, which is basically, how smart are you? Do you have high IQ? And are you motivated? Now this sort of makes sense that, okay, if you had some experience and you're smart and you're motivated, that's pretty good. That still has a 50% failure rate. So what they ended up doing is on the empirical and theory based, which is basically the experience and intelligence, only 30% of applicants scored high enough to go on to the interview. So only 30% out of the 100 scored well enough on the test to get to the interview. Once they got to the interview, the manager just talked to them and they weren't specific on what they did in the interview. And if the manager liked them, that was it. They just had to like you, you would get the job. So that 30% went down to 8.3% got a job offer. Now here comes the problem. It was possible to be a high scoring applicant and sell poor. And the problem they had is that not enough people had passed the exam. So they ended up being understaffed at MetLife. So they were understaffed, they couldn't get enough qualified people, and the qualified people they did find, only half of them worked out. So this actually wasn't a great method that they were doing. So the University of Pennsylvania asked the question, could these poor scorers sell well? Could they not do well on the test, but do really great on the job? And if so, how do we pick them? So we look back again at the traditional predictors of success, ability and aptitude. Are you smart? Motivation. Do you want it? Well, now there's a blind spot if you look just at this. And this is what most people do when they hire. This is what they look at. But here's a blind spot. Let's say I say, I'm an amazing athlete. So I have the ability. I want to win the gold medal. I'm motivated. But I think I'm going to lose. That's pessimistic. You think this person's going to win with an attitude like that? Probably not. They think they're going to lose. So this is the blind spot that University of Pennsylvania determined was the reason why MetLife wasn't hiring the right people. So what if you had a different self-talk? So you could still say, I'm an amazing athlete, I have the ability, I want to win the gold, I'm motivated, and I can win it. I'm optimistic. So what the University of Pennsylvania wanted to do was to add optimism to the surveys. So the next test that they did is that they took 104 agents and they were hired just on the MetLife profile only. Then they were given the University of Pennsylvania's ASQ survey. What was interesting is that they all scored above the national average for optimism. But when they split them out based on optimism, the most optimistic hires in the top 25% sold 50% more insurance. The least optimistic 25%, the bottom quarter, were 300% more likely to quit. So we're starting to see the level of optimism is important. When they put together the top 50% scores on both tests, That group sold 56% more. So now we're starting to see data that it's actually a good idea to give people both tests. But then they really wanted to make sure that what they were doing was actually good. So they came up with what was called the Special Forces Study, where 15,000 applicants took the career profile. This is the standard hiring method by MetLife. And then they took UPenn's ASQ survey. The first goal was they just wanted to hire 1,000 people based on the old method, the MetLife career profile. Fine. The second goal was to hire 100 new people that came in the top 50% of the UPenn survey, but they barely failed the MetLife exam. So they failed the exam. They would have never gotten the interview. They would have never gotten the job. So they scored a 9 to 11, but 12 was the cutoff. So they very closely failed. So they were still pretty good, but they failed. Well, what they wanted to do is hire these people, 1,000 of them, 100, and so that was a $3 million risk on the project, and they decided to go for it. So what they ended up doing is they looked at the optimists who came through the career profile at MetLife, and they found out that in year one, the people who were hired through MetLife, just with their one exam, 8% of them outsold the pessimists who had been hired. In year two, they had a 31% outsale on the pessimists. However, the special forces came in very interesting. They had failed the MetLife exam, but they were very high on the UPenn optimism scale. And in year one, they outsold the pessimists by 21% versus 8% for the other group. In year two, they outsold them by 57% versus 31%. And in years 1 and 2 combined, they outsold the entire group of MetLife salespeople by 27%. So there's two side effects here. That the optimists kept improving over the pessimists. The theory is that they were encouraged by their success, and optimism predicted selling results as well as the MetLife old method of doing things. So new hire profile number 1, this is another study that they did, is they ended up passing the career profile with a 12 or higher, and they also came in the top 75% of the ASQ. So this is now what they do to hire new people, that you have to pass the profile with a 12 or higher, so standard old method, and you have to be in the top 75% of the UPenn survey. What they will also do is that they will hire you if you barely fail the exam, meaning you get between a 9 and 11, but you're in the top half. So they'll give you extra credit for being an optimist. So the best practices that we're actually looking at here is simply avoid hiring pessimists and hire strong optimists, even if they have lower aptitude and motivation. So optimism actually gets more weight than their aptitude and their motivation. So again, here's some interview questions that you can ask them. Tell me about a great success and why it turned out that way. Tell me about a failure and why it turned out that way. And then use this grid to figure out, are they giving you optimistic reasons or pessimistic reasons why things are happening? And that's going to give you an idea of where they stand. You can also give them the ASQ survey. And if anyone's interested in having that, just send me an email and I can send you a link to that. Again, the survey is in this book, Learned Optimism. If anyone wants the actual survey themselves, just send me an email. I'll send it to you. And here's your 20-minute homework. I want you to write about 2 colleagues, anonymously, I don't need to know their real names. Colleague 1, in your mind, should be an optimist. Colleague 2 should be a pessimist. It would be great if they both had the same job, but they don't have to. And I want you to write about today's lecture in comparison to these 2 people. Do the optimists and pessimists in your life match the research shown today? And if so, how? If not, what do you observe? And then which of the 2 coworkers are more successful in your eyes? And do you see a relationship with optimism? So this is your 20-minute homework. I wish you good luck with it. And I think you'll start to see that optimism is a predictor for success. And hopefully you'll start to change your explanatory style. When you start to say things like, I'm awful, I'm bad, stop that. and think more optimistically. And actually, one of our modules, I'm going to show you exactly how to become more of an optimist. So I look forward to seeing you in the next session, and have a great day. Bye-bye.